Ladies and gentlemen, get your gigantic plate of Carolina barbecue, wash it down with a fresh frozen New Orleans daiquiri, then go ahead, take a trip over to Atlanta and partake in Freaknik, rest in peace, and then go ahead and retire for the night in your luxurious Tampa retirement home. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the NFC South tonight discussing must, bust, and maybes here on Fourth and Frames. I am Red Manuel, here with my co-host Nate Markham. Drew Scott is out tonight. He is traveling back from work. But we have our boy, the all-time guest appearances leader for Fourth and Frames, Mr. Keith Fleming, in the building tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get it popping.
This should be played at high volume, preferably in a residential area.
For everyone here with us tonight, whether it is on YouTube or X/Twitter, thank you so much for taking part of your Wednesday night to hang out here with us. Like we said, we are covering the NFC South tonight. Must, bust, and maybes. And of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, review to catch anytime a new Fantasy and Frames podcast or short from us drops. Don't forget to lock in at fantasyandframes.com for the latest in rankings, articles, takes, news and notes. And of course, we have Shoot the Gap coming tomorrow night. We have another episode of Fourth and Frames tomorrow night, the draft show, Fantasy Football Weekly, One Foot Down. So many things going on fantasyandframes.com and the YouTube channel, pretty much on a nightly basis. But I have to ask you, y'all, no offense, Nate, but let's get started with our guest tonight. How the heck are you, Keith Fleming? It's been a minute.
It has. Very happy to be here. I tell you guys all the time, one of my favorite shows in the fantasy space. You guys do amazing work, and just so excited that football is right around the corner. You know, I do golf content, and it gets me through the lull of basically January to, September. But at this point, the playoffs are here. That's great for the FedEx. I'm ready for football, man. I miss this stuff so much. Excited to be back here and ready to fill out some DFS lineups, which I'm now just 3 weeks away, because I'm a degenerate, but I'm not the kind of degenerate that's going to do preseason DFS lineups. That's a bridge too far. So very excited to be back in, the fantasy world and ready for this football season to start.
Yeah, I want you guys to know we're going to make it very clear. We are degenerates with boundaries here on Fourth and Frames. Nate Markham, had yourself a pretty good time over in Canton, Ohio last weekend at the Fantasy Expo. Man, tell me a little bit about that. Maybe some guys that you met, you chopped it up with a little bit, and the experience you took away from that.
Yeah, it was our fourth year going for Kerry and I. Each year consistently gets better year over year. Obviously, being part of the Kings Classic, the Blanda division, where I got a draft alongside 13 other degenerates, but degenerates that get paid to do this for a living, that are more have higher accolades, and don't get me wrong, I think that we're all peers when it comes to that. But it was one of the best experiences from a draft perspective, is knowing that at the end of my table where I was pick 11, it went myself, Ian Harditz, then Nate Polvo, and Rich Rebar. And so that turn was a vicious one. It was
wow.
It was nasty, but it's not like the beginning of that draft was any easier when you have Matt Kelly, a player profiler gang, and Theo, and Marcus Grant, and so on and so forth, Mauricio, et cetera. I'm leaving people out, but mostly by design. Drew Davenport, if you ever hear this, it's because I didn't want to include you. But it was also in the auction format, 3 of the guys that were on the auction panel last year. So preeminent, go-to figures in auction. It was fantastic. Had a great opportunity to talk to a lot of people. We spent too much money, but at the same time, I would invest every dollar for the memories that we made. So it was great, guys. I missed both of you there. Of course, I would love to have you there. And Rhett, I know with school season starting right after, it's a difficult chore. Keith, you have no excuse. So make the trip. What? You don't have any excuse as good as you have to teach children.
I don't, but you don't want me teaching children. So to be fair, we're going to be there next year. Unfortunately, it did not work out because my wife is going to go too. Definitely, like she wants to meet all you guys. So
she can go to the winery with Carrie. Carrie and the girls go to a winery on Saturday while we do all drafting.
She would love that. So we're definitely going to be there next year. I told Jorge that is a promise. I will be there in person next season.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, man, sounds like a good time was had by everybody. Love the connections you're making. Although I do need to know with like how you felt you did in that draft in the Kings Classic with that run of guys drafting around you, because those are some heavy hitters. Those are some smart guys having the analytics, like just real deep in the streets.
Right. So funny little story going in is that I printed out my sheets and I copied and pasted and made my own particular rankings based on 14 teams and for auction and snaking. I made the first one and realized afterwards that I had left off like one page, and I was like, oh shit. And so instead of just throwing that page away, it got blended in. And of course, luck of the draw has it, that's the page I was doing my rankings off of to start off. So I get to pick, mind you, pick number 13, I believe it was in the draft, was Malik Neighbors. He went the end of the first round. And I'm looking for Neighbors to cross him off, and I have to go to page like 4. And I was like, what in the world is going on here? And I realized I had the wrong one. So round 3 comes up. I'm on the clock, and I mentioned Devonta Smith, his name, who had been drafted 2 picks prior to me. And I was spending so much time trying to find everybody else's name. I was the first person to double up on a name that had been drafted, or pick a name that had been drafted, much to my embarrassment, chagrin. Luckily, others did the same thing throughout the draft. But yeah, I felt like after that snafu, the teams, you know what? I have confidence in myself. I listen to you guys.
Love that.
I've been doing this for, you know, how I've been playing. Like Hutchinson Brown was to my left. He was pick number 10. I've been playing fantasy for 10 years longer than he's been alive. Now, that doesn't make me 10 years smarter. It doesn't make me any smarter. But if I can't trust in my ability to be able to draft a team, no matter who your competition is, you know, and stay water, I was happy. Keith, I didn't get a ton of Atlanta Falcons, unfortunately. Let's see. I'd have Jahmyr Gibbs, and that was the only disappointing part after the fact. But Gibbs and Taylor to start off the the snake draft at pick 11 and then at pick 17. So, you know, we'll go into the teams later. We don't want to drag on too much about my team because everybody loves hearing about your fantasy team. No one.
Yeah, everyone loves it. So we're just going to go ahead. We're going to keep it moving from there and get into some news and notes around the NFL. Guys, it's a pretty bad week right now if you're a Minnesota Vikings fan. Sorry, Richard Sickles, but I mean, there are some things going down in Minnesota right now. Let's start with the J.J. McCarthy injury. Torn meniscus, has surgery. Comes out today that he is out for the 2024 season. Rookie season is a wash. So, Nate, I'm going to go ahead and start with you and just ask you the obvious question in the room. What does this do for Sam Darnold's fantasy stock?
Oh, it's just nothing but ceiling play all day. Super flex, 3 quarterback per team, 15-team league. He is easily draftable now. He is definitely up there. Somebody that I'll probably target in the mid to late teens at that point, but I'm not a Sam Darnold fan. I don't care about the weapons. Having Jefferson late in the season, maybe having Hawkinson back and Jordan Addison should be beneficial, but I don't know how long he has that job for. I mean, I just don't even have an answer. I feel worse for obviously the scenario with Jefferson and company.
Yeah, Keith, any thoughts on it? Anything you want to add to it, or are you pretty much in lockstep with Nate?
I mean, I actually am a little bit more bullish on Darnold from a fantasy perspective. Don't think he's a great QB, but we talk about this all the time. These offenses that are under the McVay tree, they chuck it a lot. And, again, I think Jefferson, I'm buying up all the value. I know everybody's passing on him. I look at like what he did with Nick Mullins and Jared Hall last year, averaging over 120 yards per game and 11 targets. I ain't worried about it. You still got to throw. And a good thing about bad teams is they're down a lot, which means they throw even more. So, again, Darnold's not going to win any beauty pageants, but if you're talking about now somebody that you're getting, say, as your last QB to be your second on a, kind of a standard roster team, or your second QB in a 2 QB league. I'm not, sky's falling type dude. I hate it for the Vikings in general, though, because I thought JJ McCarthy was the most ready to play right now out of any of these QBs in this class. Not saying he's the best, but I'm saying he was the most ready to lead an NFL team just with the experience he had. And he looked really good in that first preseason game. And it's just a bummer when the real value of these rookie QBs is their rookie contract. And now they're going to be going into year 2 being year 1. So really you're looking at like year 3 being his first year. Really, how good is JJ McCarthy? And you're getting near the end of that rookie contract. So that's a bummer for him. I thought the Vikings could be a sneaky team in a year or 2. And now that just puts all that on pause.
Now, the one thing, though, that, and not to pour cold water on this situation, but I have heard this brought up a few times, and I think it's worth talking about, is 2 of those games at the end of the season were against the Detroit Lions, who allowed, as we saw multiple times, basically an open avenue to excessive pass yards. And so 2 of those games coming in the late, does it taint the overall, ceiling and or floor of Justin Jefferson? No, because I think he's capable of torching anybody in the NFL. He's, there's not too many corners that can contain him, but it does. When I heard that initially, and I remember going back thinking, yeah, Detroit was a team that I would attack, especially from an alpha 1. It makes me a little less, like, I had Jefferson as, a 5th, 6th, 7th pick overall comfortably, and getting the discount. I might push him back. I think I'd put him behind AJ Brown right now. I think that's where I have him, probably like wide receiver 7, 8. I think I'm comfortable. And
I think that's a fair assessment on him at the moment. But I mean, at the end of the day, you're talking about Jordan Jefferson. We saw the Justin Jefferson. Jordan was his not so good LSU quarterback brother who never made the league, but I digress. Lot of trauma as a Louisiana person. 2011 national championship, they didn't cross the 50. It was tough. Anyway, past my trauma, and let's talk about fantasy football. Outside of that, that last month that Justin Jefferson had with guys like Jaron Hall and whoever else were just dynamite. So as much as you say he's down to maybe wide receiver 7 or 8 for you right now, Nate, I mean, I'm still comfortable with him being a top 5 guy, because when you have someone who is as dynamic as he is, even with Sam Darnold's experience around the league, I mean, you still have to think that with Jordan Addison possibly being hurt, he was carted off the field today in a joint practice with the Browns, and TJ Hockenson probably not being back till after midseason. I mean, what are your options there? I mean, you have Justin Jefferson, you have
31% target share last year in those games, and Addison was on the field. So I mean, he's going to get peppered with target, and that's where I'm looking at just volume. Volume is going to be insane.
Yeah. So yeah, guys, those are our news and notes. Let's go ahead and let's get into why we're here tonight. Guys, let's talk about the NFC South, where last season we had the Tampa Bay Buccaneers just come out and surprise everyone, have the great season that they did, and they end up making the playoffs, winning a playoff game. So, guys, this is a team that is believing in themselves. Todd Bowles wants them to think about the Super Bowl. Maybe I'm not going that far. What I'm going to go as far as to say is talk about our must-draft wide receiver for that team, and that is going to be Chris Godwin. Guys, the slot king is back in Tampa Bay. There's a lot of talk that new offensive coordinator Liam Cohen is going to use him in that situation a lot more than they did last year. And if he is currently wide receiver 33 and he's going back to the slot where he's absolutely had the best seasons of his career, then I think we're way too low on him at this point, because if you look at the raw statistics themselves last season, in terms of receptions and receiving yards, Chris Godwin actually outproduced Mike Evans in both of those categories. The problem was that Baker Mayfield loved to chalk the ball down the field. And when the time came for the red zone, he was looking for one man and one man only. And that was Mike Evans. Now, does that carry over this season? Maybe so. But if we're getting back into the slot, there's a lot to love about a guy if he emulates the usage he had in his prime years, like in 2021, where he had 98 catches for 1,103 yards. and you're talking about slot rates, which is the big takeaway with Godwin. If you're all in on Godwin, you're all in on his slot rate. You're all in on that narrative. Last year, despite the fact that he had the most receptions and receiving yards, his slot rate where he was less productive was only 38.3%. Compared to 2022, where he was at a 72.5% slot rate. And oh yeah, just for good measure, he caught 104 balls that year. And 2021, the 98 catches, 1,103 yards, that was a 70.3% slot rate. So long story short, when he's in the slot, Chris Godwin is going to eat. Not to mention, he's heading into his age 28, age 29 season. There's a possibility that he can hit the open market in free agency for the first time in his career this offseason. So you have a guy who's in the best role that he's most comfortable in a potential contract year with something to prove and try to get that one last big payday before he rides off into the sunset. Guys, if all that is holding true, sunny days are ahead for Chris Godwin, and he's bound to outperform that ADP in a big way.
Yeah, if we get to the bold takes, I will reaffirm your stance on Chris Godwin myself.
Yeah, so that is our must player, Chris Godwin. Let's get into our bust player where Keith Fleming, you have a take. He was super used last year. Not saying he was efficient, but he indeed had a high usage rate. So go ahead and tell me why Rachaad White is your bust for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here in 2024.
Excuse me. No, tickle in my throat. He was a pleasant surprise last year. I used him a lot in DFS down the stretch. He had a great run of like 4 or 5 weeks. I think it was like week 11 through 16. But it was, 10th in points per game at running back, 14th rushing yard, 3rd in receiving yards, 4th in receptions. But it was his volume that led to that. He was 2nd in carries, 4th in snap share, 9th in targets and touches. The issue is they added Bucky Irvin, who, in my opinion, is a superior pass catching back, like a superior pass catching back than Rachaad White. And that was where he did a lot of his damage. I mean, 64 receptions, 550 receiving yards. I just don't see him duplicating that. And if you look at his rushing statistics, again, he got a lot of rush attempts, and it got better down the stretch. So I don't want to say that he couldn't be as effective of a runner as he was, say, the second half of the season compared to the first. But I just think he's going to have to lean more on the rushing yards, because I think they're going to figure out very quickly that Bucky Irvin is just better in that third down pass catching role. And that's going to really limit his ceiling. And we've kind of seen when Rachaad White is a monster in fantasy, it's usually because he's heavily involved in the passing game. I'm just worried that's not going to be the case this season. And that's why I'm kind of down on him overall, especially like kind of where his ADP is currently right now.
So, Nate, I need to ask you, Keith seems to be very high on the idea of Bucky Irving carving out that pass-catching role. If that indeed does happen, Rachaad White is still being seen as a late RB1 right now, high-end RB2. If Bucky Irving starts to cut into that pass-catching role, how low can the floor drop for Rachaad White, in your opinion?
I mean, let's be honest. If the pass-catching upside, as Keith alluded to, when you look at the biggest games that Rachaad White had, and a lot of his elevated just floor. I mean, that's why he was going so high. Is it's like you can base 6-7 points a game just strictly on his pass catching prowess. If you take that away, and all of a sudden he's not effective, and if he's not effective and Bucky Irving takes control of that role and he doesn't excel, that probably tells me the offense isn't going to move nearly as much either. And so then, chicken or the egg concept. I have not bought into a ton of Rachaad White this season. I do like, I like the player at times. Like if he had that complementary role, it just worries me about the usage of Bucky Irving. And I liked him a lot better last year since I had a ton of Rachaad White and it paid off. Maybe, get out before it collapses.
So it sounds like there might be a sell window prior to the season with Rachaad White. Before Bucky Irving perhaps pops off, there may be a sell window there with Rachaad White. So our must being Chris Godwin, our bust being Rachaad White. Nate Markham, you've got a hot take for us. You have a maybe. It is a tight end who has shown some flashes at times, but it really hasn't gotten that usage to really put him up into that stratosphere. So tell us why Nate Cade Otton is a big, fat, giant maybe for you heading into the season.
And what happens in a lot of drafts is that, we want to wait and say, you know what, I'm going to wait till that Dalton Kincaid, that spot, that 5 or 6, and then Kyle Pitts is there. And then you're contemplating George Kittle. And then, I'll wait for Pat Freiermuth. Oh, maybe Brock Bowers should be the guy. And I'm not saying Cade Otton's going to be your tight end 1. I'm going to clearly state that right now. He's the guy that if you wait long enough, I believe a good strategy is to take 2 bottom tiers or lower tier tight ends and play that game. And I think Cade Otton is the perfect complement to if you want to go, Jake Ferguson and then Cade Otton, or maybe you take, 2 super late guys. But here's the case on Cade Otton is what we saw starting off is an escalation in involvement in that offense. Go back to the 2 most recent games we've seen. A lot of people say you're only as good as your last game. And if I said, hey, let's go back to the wildcard game against the Eagles that they decimated them, I would say, who led that team? Who led that Tampa Bay Buccaneers receiving core and targets? I would bet not a lot of money because I'm not a super big gambler on stupid shit and people pay attention, but many wouldn't say Cade Otton. And Cade Otton did lead that team in targets. You go to the next game in the divisional series against Detroit, and he was second on the team in targets. The one thing that I don't know if that's the norm. He's not going to average 9.5 targets per game. That's a guarantee right now. But what we did see is you were talking about Chris Godwin going back in the slot. When Godwin was in the slot, the majority, Otton's targets in those. So week 7, he had 6 targets. Week 11, he had 5 targets. 12, he had 4. 16 was an off week, and then 6 in week 17. And then, of course, like I said, the aforementioned wild card and divisional round. So for a tight end 22, that was top 10 in end zone targets last year. He ran the 2nd most routes in the NFL amongst tight ends. He had the 3rd highest route participation. And we see a steady improvement. It was not only top 10 in end zone targets, but he was top 10. He had 10 red zone targets. So it's just a combination of his usage involvement, the high caliber catches, or at least high caliber targets, that if you're shooting for extreme upside, he hits every box that I would put into why a tight end would make sense, because at that point you're not going for 7 for 85. You want 4 for 44 and a touchdown, and that's going to be a tight end 1 every week that if you happen to hit, and Cade Otton's a pretty good option to give you that.
Yeah, I love that take. I love exactly what you said. When you're getting into that late round tight end window, it's all about finding guys who can get you touchdowns, who can snake you a touchdown here and there. And by the end of the season, you're looking at a guy who shockingly ends up with about 50 catches for 524 yards and 7 or 8 touchdowns. And all of a sudden, you've got a high-end tight end 2 or a low-end tight end 1, strictly off of the fact that, they were used in the red zone quite a bit. So I love the idea behind that. Also worth noting for me is the fact that if you look at how Liam Cohen, being a Sean McVay guy, and I heard this somewhere today, is the fact that at the end of the day, when Sean McVay had a tight end worth using, like a Tyler Higbee or someone of that sort, they tended to get used in that offense pretty effectively. So you add in all these factors, and I know one of the big rules of thumb for me personally is you try to find a tight end who is a top 2 target on their team. We can all agree that's not going to be Cade Otton.
No.
But that being said, at the end of the day, anytime you looked at those Rams offenses as well, Tyler Higbee was never a top 2 option either. He ended up being pretty damn effective on some weeks. So I'm with you, man. I'm really excited about that pick you just made. So that wraps up the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, guys. Our must player being Chris Godwin, our bust player being Rachaad White, our maybe player being Cade Otton. Let's go ahead, guys. Let's keep it moving to your future Super Bowl champion. Sorry, Keith Fleming. 28-3 is still a thing. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how much I love you. It was years ago. We should have never counted out Tom Brady. All of this is fine. All that to say, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about the New Orleans Saints, and we're just going to jump right out of the gate. Nate, go ahead and give us your must. It feels pretty obvious. He's been doing it for years.
Yeah, and of course the must. As soon as I wrote it in, fast forward 24, 36 hours, somewhere around there, and his back is acting up. But it's precautionary. I'm not too worried about it. Alvin Kamara, 29 years old. I expect to have a little bit of the old, need to back you out of me here after week 1 and play preseason. But coming in, many people, when asking to build a narrative on Alvin Kamara, you'd say, all right, he's coming off the second worst yards per carry in his career, 3.9. Would I say he's a must? The answer is obviously yes, because what I think is that you have the perfect recipe for a running back going as the RB16, RB17, depending upon if you're in half point or full point PPR. You have an offensive line that cover your ears.
Terrible.
Garbage. Terrible. Okay, that's good. Do we have any other synonyms? Garbage, terrible,
Ass,
atrocious.
On
You
brand.
got any? On brand.
Wow, that's good. I like that.
Well, Derek Carr's been on brand. He is a check down connoisseur. If you look up check down in the fantasy dictionary, you definitely will see Derek Carr's face. And those two pieces blended in with pass catching prowess. And personally, I'm not the biggest Kendre Miller fan of him actually eating it. The injury is the only real major concern right now. But what else has Kamara done? So last year, we know, obviously, going into the season, we were going to not get a full 17-game workload out of Kamara. I think that was kind of assumed already, right? But he did still handle 66% of the runs inside the 5 despite missing time. He had a 2.8% touchdown rate, which was the 15th highest rate in the NFL, which that's an average. So, I mean, you can't really say time missed, but still, I didn't think many people were looking at his touchdown volume as being a predicator or a supporter of his overall fantasy finish. I think it was, pretty much just a pass catching game, which he did. But I think when you combine, the fact that he was 6th in yards, first in a per game basis, he was the 3rd highest first read amongst running backs at 11.6%. So we know Carr's going to check down, and he ran the 6th most designed runs amongst running backs. So they're going to get the ball in his hands. Nothing's going to change from last year to this year, barring injury. And at RB16, 17, it just seems like the most silly, solid floor that you can have, as he could be your RB1. And I don't think it would be an absolute ridiculous take to load up at wide receiver and tight end and take Kamara as your 1 and then follow it up with, maybe a running back that I'll talk about tomorrow as your 2. Who knows? Stay tuned. Same 4th and Frames time, same 4th and Frames channel.
First off, what a plug. What a way to get our beloved listeners / watchers back tomorrow night. And Nate, I'm with you on this, especially in PPR formats on Kamara. And here's why. I'm just going to go ahead and give you the most hilarious Alvin Kamara stat line ever from last season. He makes his season debut against Tampa at home. 14 targets, 13 catches, 33 yards.
There we go.
It never fails to crack you up. But I remember watching that game and just being like, is this where we are right now as an offense? But you know what? If you had him for fantasy purposes that week and you were in full PPR, you didn't really care at that point because Alvin Kamara caught 13 passes that week. So, yeah, I mean, you're not wrong in the fact that in a PPR format, you can do a lot worse than going with the 29-year-old guy that is almost guaranteed to walk into 100 targets if he's healthy. So, I mean, It's rock solid logic behind it. So that is our must for the New Orleans Saints and Alvin Kamara. I'm going to go ahead and go with a bust, who is the complete anti-Alvin Kamara at this point because we expect Kamara to get a lot of volume in the passing game. My bust being Rashid Shaheed, who is a very hot name this offseason, especially in Scott Fishbowl circles with all this kick return stuff we had going on and a lot of speculation about where he would be used. And in the Scott Fish Bowl, yes, of course, I understand where you are. He is a value, even in current drafts at Fantasy Pros. He's the ECR wide receiver 55. I understand that he's a value. But can we take everything about Rashid Shaheed into consideration? Is he a big play threat? Absolutely. Is he fun as hell to watch and fun as hell to draft? Yes, of course he is. Is he a consistent performer that you're going to rely on a week-to-week basis? No. And that's fine, because I think a lot of teams are built around having guys who you get in later rounds that can give you those spike weeks that can absolutely help your team out. I'm not saying that he's not going to be that guy, but if we're expecting consistency and for him to take a big leap forward this season, which I think is the personal expectation of some fantasy football fans, I'm just saying to lock in and be prepared for disappointment, because last season, despite the big weeks that he only had a 14% target share last season in that offense. And guys, I'm going to be honest with you on a lot of things. In this Kubiak offense, which is very much predicated on using San Francisco 49ers-esque concepts and using those wide receivers in those similar ways, A.T. Perry is a very, very interesting option that you can get much later. And here's the main reason why. He's going to block. And if you're in that offense, you're going to need to block. And if you're blocking and you're doing it effectively, you're going to be on the field. So this is not so much as an anti-Rashid Shaheed rant as it is a pro A.T. Perry thing, and saying that a guy that's going undrafted could be a guy that you could be getting on the waiver wire a little bit later in the season. Now, about Shaheed, yes, like I said, there will be big weeks. There are going to be winning weeks you get from him, and that alone makes him worth drafting. But like I said, this offense is going to need those blockers, and A.T. Perry is likely to be that guy who's going to be more than willing to take that role on. And furthermore, people don't realize that Rashid Shaheed is actually 27 years old at this point. So he's much older than people realize. And yes, he doesn't have a lot of tread on those tires, but we have a younger guy who's got a 6'5", 210-pound frame, who's willing to do everything that's asked of him in the offense. I just think it makes it really hard to fully go in on Rashid Shaheed when you have somebody behind him who can possibly push him into that third wide receiver role, where, if we're being honest, he might even be more effective.
Yeah, I'm outside of Scott Fish, who I was definitely in on Shaheed. I have not been in on a lot of the same reasons why I said I'm in on Kamara. I'm out on Shaheed because I don't know how Derek Carr is going to find time to throw the ball further than 5.5 yards per attempt, and that's really where Shaheed has garnered a lot of the potential upside. Is it's not the dink and dunk and the short to intermediate, I don't believe, but yeah. What do you guys think? Do you think that how much effect does Scott Fish ADP and drafting and content information bleed into the regular season with the regular non-degenerate folks like ourselves? Do you think they hear that and it becomes buzzworthy and they inflate him because of that one specific scenario?
I mean, Keith, you go ahead and take this. I'll let you take that first, and I'll respond after that.
I think for sure that's part of the case. I think that's just, we live in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And, it's like one person says some nice things about a player on a popular podcast, and it's like it just funnels down. It's why I try to stay away from saying crazy things just in general. Like I hate seeing some of these people be like, this guy's in for a breakout year. And it's like, what's really his ceiling? Like, can you define breakout year for me? Like, or it just, I think it's kind of the point that, Rhett was making. It's his value. Like, it's where he's going is why I pretty much agree with him. Like, I think it's extremely risky when his ceiling, if everything went great, I just don't think it's going to be worth the risk of taking him where he's at when I can get other receivers going to get more consistent targets, being a better offense behind a better offensive line.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Now, I think that offensive line is a big concern. Now, I will say that at wide receiver 55, the upside for Shaheed if he does happen to have that breakout season, let's be honest, is astronomical because he's track fast.
Mhm.
And if everything happens, if that offensive line happens to shock and actually be halfway decent, like there is some major upside there. But at the end of the day, we have to go with what we have right now. And what we have right now is Trevor Penning getting dominated by no-name Arizona Cardinals edge rushers in preseason. We have a rookie left tackle on the right side. We have some guards who may or may not be interesting. Like there's just a lot of concerns with that Saints offensive line.
Arizona, who,
really,
by the way, PFF ranked their defensive front 32nd coming into the season for pass rush. So,
yeah,
not a good sign.
To quote the great TV series Mad Men, not great, Bob. So, just a lot to be concerned about with that and Rashid Shaheed, which I guess kind of brings us to why you have our maybe Chris Olave in the spot that you do, Keith.
Yeah, I mean, kind of to your point, and again, this is why I think Rashid is not the value. The guy in the Saints offense, if everything goes right and the offensive line is better and Carr is able to throw the ball further down the field, it's Olave because this poor rookie class, man, like I really believe in Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Drake London. Drake London's finally going to get a chance to have a competent quarterback throwing him the ball. If Aaron Rodgers is back and healthy and 85% of even what he was 2 years ago, Garrett Wilson is finally going to have a competent guy getting him the ball. And then Chris Olave, we'll see. I mean, like last year, he was 6th in air yards, 4th in deep targets, 3rd in unrealized air yards. I think he is arguably the most talented deep threat in the NFL, at least of these young wide receivers. I mean, obviously not like Tyreek Hill level, but I really do think Olave is that kind of big play waiting to happen. I do think there is a chance that Carr's shoulder injury last year played a bigger role than people want to say. I know the offensive line was bad, but I mean, like if you look about it, last year his deep ball catchable pass rate, 47%. The 2 years before it was over 57 and 54.4%. Air yards per attempt, also a low for over the last 5 years at 7.9. Just in 2022, it was 9.2 yards, air yards per attempt. And I am a big believer in Olave's talent. And if you look at like before the injury happened in the Packers game week 3. Olave's first 3 games, 8 for 112, 6 for 86, 8 for 104. He then went 7 games without a 100-yard performance. And again, this was when Carr admitted his shoulder was messed up. He made some comments later in the season that it was feeling better. He had over 100 yards in 3 of his final 6 games. So if you're somebody that believes that Carr, you know, his shoulder played an issue, you think the offensive line and offense is going to be a little better, I think Olave has as much upside as any wide receiver because he's actually put up really good numbers despite, you know, again, like London and Wilson not really having the advantages a lot of these other young stars like Jamar Chase, et cetera, have had early in their career. But it's still a big risk because I just don't know if I can trust this Saints offensive line. And who knows? I mean, maybe Carr just isn't that good. To Nate's point, he's never been a great down the field thrower. It's just last year it was horrible. And I do think, though, the fact that he had that shoulder injury, you can't say that didn't play at least some part of it. The question is how much. And with where Olave's going and all these other guys around it, it's just to me a very risky play. And that's where I have him in the maybe category because I actually think Olave is one of the most talented wide receivers in football. I was dead wrong about him. I was not high on him coming out of college. I thought he was too slight. I didn't think he'd work in the NFL. And boy, has he proved me wrong because Drew Brees was absolutely washed his rookie season. He still had a really good year and he's put up good numbers with Carr. So it's just, do you think, you know, everything's going to be fixed that wasn't right last year? If so, his numbers could take a huge increase. If not, I think he's going to have a very similar season that he did this year that's going to frustrate his fantasy owners.
All right, getting to Olave, and yes, I'm with you on everything, but I just want to take a quick aside. I don't know if it was Olave's rookie year or second year. It might have been when Drew Brees was hurt. There's a legendary Chris Olave what-if fantasy game where I think Jameis Winston had him hit close to like 400 air yards or something in one game. Like, it was just a crazy about where Jameis was just throwing YOLO balls the entire game, and the entire focus of that was Chris Olave. So, yeah, to completely agree with you, this is a guy that is absolutely one of the premier deep threats in the league. He's shown his chops as a route runner. Is he a little bit slight? Sure. But, I mean, he's currently the Fantasy Pros ECR wide receiver 11, which tells me everything you need to know about what the community thinks about him, despite the fact that this offensive line is seen as potentially one of the worst in the league. And this quarterback is not seen in an especially bright light for fantasy purposes. So, Chris Olave, like you said, a big maybe for this guy. But, I mean, if the light clicks and everything goes according to plan, you've got a home run on your hands. I completely agree with that. So, the New Orleans Saints, that is it for them. Our must, Alvin Kamara. Our bust, Rashid Shaheed. And our maybe, Chris Olave. Now we got to go to the part that hurts me, but the part that gives our man Keith Fleming so much joy. Let's take a ride down.
Carried away. It's the Falcons. It gives me joy. So much joy would be crazy with what I've experienced over my life as a fan of this franchise.
Let's take a ride to the ATL, though. And let's talk about your must, Keith Fleming, because the hype is real on this guy. And I need to know why you're in on Drake London for 2024.
I mean, to be honest, it's like, why am I not in on Drake London? He plays the X wide receiver, which is the hardest position to play for a wide receiver. Still features a route tree that you name it, he can do it. Digs, corners, outs, go routes. Like, he can do it all. Last season, first in contested catches, despite 29th in targets among wide receivers. He succeeds versus all kinds of defense. Versus man, he's in the 68th percentile. Versus zone, 77th percentile. Versus press, 81st percentile. So no matter what you run at him, he's going to be able to do well and find success against it. The biggest reason, though, is the Falcons averaged 27.2 pass attempts per game the first two seasons that Drake London has been in the league. The last full Cousins season in Minnesota, which, a reminder, O'Connell comes from the same coaching tree that Zach Robinson, is going to be coming from, who's now the Falcons offensive coordinator. 39.6 pass attempts in 2022 for Kirk Cousins. Last season in 8 games, 38.8 pass attempts per game from Kirk Cousins. And then on top of that, Cousins' top wide receiver during his time with the Vikings, over 9 targets per game, over 18 fantasy points. And go watch the Tampa game last year where Desmond Ridder is just flinging it about as far as his poor little arm could throw it. And all Drake London was doing was making incredible catch after incredible catch. I'm very high on Kyle Pitts, coming back year 2 from the injury. I think people are going to be reminded of just the superior athlete he is. But I think Drake London, if you look what he did again, Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder have been his QBs his first 2 seasons. And despite that, with Ridder 1.91 yards per route run, that's pretty good with Desmond Ridder. With Marcus Mariota 2.4 yards per route run, this is an offense that's going from one of the lowest percentages of expected pass plays over average to probably one of the highest. This team is going to completely flip with the offense. And obviously, I think London and Pitts are the big benefactors of that. And I think London particularly is the more valuable player because of the position he plays. And again, just the fact that typically number 1 wide receivers in this offense feast. They run routes on almost every play, and they're on the field all the time.
Yeah, I mean, so I have to ask you right now, these 2 guys, Chris Olave and Drake London, they are neck and neck right now in Fantasy Pros ECR. Chris Olave is wide receiver 11. Drake London is wide receiver 12. So I'm going to go around the frames real quick and ask you, which of those guys do you prefer for 2024? Keith, I think I know where you're going because he's your must, whereas the other one was your maybe. But are you taking London or Olave for 2024?
Yeah, it's London. I think they're going to throw the ball more. And even if it's Cousins or Penix, having watched them in their practice, it was open to fans and the Mercedes-Benz. That's the other thing I just love about the Falcons passing game this year is Penix. I'm not saying he's going to be great, but he can throw the ball. So I don't think the offense changed much if Cousins is, gets injured, nicked up or whatever. So I think he's going to get a lot more targets. I think he has actually a higher floor and ceiling this year than Chris Olave because of the offense he's in.
Nate, I saw you nodding over there. You agree with
I do.
Yeah.
If you ever have to have a tiebreaker between two people that you see a floor and a ceiling very comparable, always look at the quarterback, and I trust Cousins much more than I trust Carr as far as being able to continuously support that floor and even have a higher ceiling.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm with you as well. I think my homer bias wants me to take Olave in this situation, but the realist in me has to look at it and say that Drake London is probably the play right there. So that is our Atlanta Falcons must, wide receiver Drake London. Nate, you have a bust for us, but I don't necessarily think you're sold on it, bud. Talk about it.
I'm not sold on any of bust in Atlanta. It really is. I even messaged Keith last week and I said, tell me why I can't figure a bust out, because Kirk Cousins is the QB, 16, 17. There's nowhere to go but upside from there because you're not drafting him as a starter. Let's look at Bijan. Short of injury, I just see no conceivable way for him to finish outside the top 5 at the position. A variance of 2 to 3 spots from where drafted. Drake London's the same way. Kyle Pitts is the same way. You don't draft Darnell Mooney or even the person I mentioned, Tyler Algier, in that fashion. The only thing, the reason I said bust for Tyler Algier is that coach speak right now is that they said that Tyler Algier will still have a considerable role within the offense. And I think there's a non-zero chance that Algier will just be lapped with the excellence that Bijan Robinson can show. And we go from last year where, what was it, like a 20 or 38, 28 more carries than Algier last year, 214 to 186.
Fuck you, Arthur Smith.
But that being said, he's the running back 55. So it's not like that's even built into his ADP. He's the must draft if you have Bijan, because you can actually get a superior handcuff at RB 55 and yet still be a bust because many people are going to buy into, well, maybe he's flex worthy some given weeks because he was last year. But given where the draft capital's at right now, I just don't want my name attached to the bust for Tyler Algier because I don't think there's a bust given his draft capital. But y'all forced me to take somebody. So I'm going to make a compelling case for why I think that if I had to, maybe so, but I would rather hear more about your maybe, Rhett, than my bust.
Oh, yeah, because I'm getting spicy tonight, baby. If there's something I like to do at least once a week, I like to get a little bit spicy. And there's nothing more spicy than offending Drew Scott and saying that Kyle Pitts might be a maybe here in 2024, which is what I'm here to do. But, guys, it goes back to what we were talking about. This Falcons offense has so much going on for it. You have Bijan Robinson, who Raheem Morris is saying hung the moon, the stars. He poured bathwater into the sea. Like he broke each individual piece of glass to make the beautiful, pristine sands that are along that beach. Like there is so much that they love about Bijan Robinson. And then almost as much as they love about Drake London. So if it truly is Bijan's time this season and also Drake London's breakout season simultaneously, guys, somebody has to be left out in that situation. And I'm not even saying that Kyle Pitts is in for a bad season. Like, I think he is a guy that, for all intents and purposes, you're forcing me to take a maybe. So I can't take the quarterback because he's got too much upside. I can't take the running back as a maybe because he's an absolute slam dunk. Keith already took the wide receiver as his must. So I got to take somebody. And the guy that made the most sense for me in that situation was Kyle Pitts. Because, yes, he has the elite talent. And, yes, Kirk Cousins got the best years out of TJ Hawkinson in Minnesota while he was the quarterback. So Kirk
Kyle
Cousins
Rudolph, Jordan Reed, Tyler Conklin, like tight ends have feasted with Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, so you're forcing me to take somebody. But at the end of the day, if Bijan Robinson's amount of touches this season are truly in that 300 to 350 range, which I think is well within the range of possibilities, then I think there's a 65 to 75 catch season for Bijan Robinson as well. And if that happens in that situation, then those targets have to come away from somebody. And if Drake London is that dude and he can run all the routes, then you have to take it away from somebody. And that has to be Kyle Pitts in that situation. But even so, in that situation, you got to understand that Atlanta's first preseason game told us a lot about where the focal points of that offense are going to be. Because there were 3 guys in the skill positions that didn't take a single snap in that first preseason game. Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts. So it's a maybe with a bullet, but once again, you guys forced me to take somebody. So I had to take the odd man out between those two, and that's going to be Kyle Pitts. Translation, guys, draft Atlanta players. We're pretty high on them. So our must, Drake London. Our bust with a bullet, Tyler Algier. And our maybe with yet another bullet, Kyle Pitts. That brings us into a team that has undergone a world of change this offseason in the Carolina Panthers. And I'm just going to go ahead and jump into this must, guys. Quarterback Bryce Young. I'm dying on this hill. And like the Insane Cloud Posse once said, I've seen miracles far and wide. I've seen football maven Dave Canales resurrect careers from Geno Brony Smith all the way up to Baker Mayfield. This has a chance to be his greatest reclamation project because I have never seen any first overall pick take more of a stock hit after his first year than Bryce Young has. And he's been pretty much left for dead at this point, but I'm going to trust the Canales process because I've seen him do it twice. I've seen him take a former second-round pick that wasn't thought very highly of and have the most efficient season of his career and absolutely cook the Saints. And I've seen him take a former first overall pick in Baker Mayfield with a very similar profile and watch him have an incredible season. And to be honest with Bryce Young, he's currently quarterback 29 in ADP according to Fantasy Pros. He's already free. And you can't deny the building that they've done around him this offseason and adding guys like Deontay Johnson, drafting Jonathan Brooks, drafting Jatavian Sanders, making huge upgrades along that interior offensive line, adding a guy like Xavier Legette who has a chance to be special if that athleticism carries over. For Bryce Young, I think a large part of the problem last year was twofold. Number one, that offensive line was bad. And number two, the weapons in that offense were bad to the point where Adam Thielen was a real deal fantasy asset for about 6 weeks last year at about 32 years old. So for Bryce Young to outperform his ADP is not a huge hurdle to get over at all. In fact, it's not even a hurdle because in your one quarterback leagues, he's going undrafted. And in your 2 quarterback leagues, your super flex leagues, he's already around quarterback 29. So he's even being drafted as the 3rd quarterback in most situations. And for me, this is a guy that has real high-end quarterback 2 upside if everything falls into place with the solid offensive line, this improved weapons. Sign me up for this experiment no matter what because it's too cheap to ignore.
You know, it's hard to say anything negative after a really compelling, speech or argument for a player. And I want to buy into it. I'm the eternal optimist. I want the player to be well. I want the level of NFL quarterbacks to improve, and everything you've said carries weight. It's worthwhile to invest because, like you said, when it's free, Who cares?
Would you,
if you saw a lottery ticket on the ground, you're compelled to pick it up and scan it just to see if it's a winner. And if it's not, guess what? You throw it away and you walk on. And that's what Bryce Young is. He's the garbage can lottery ticket that you check to see if it's a winner. And if it's not, you move on.
Yeah, I mean, it really is true. I mean, at this point, it might not be the most compelling argument from many people, but when it comes to Bryce Young, I mean, what have you got to lose? I mean, the weapons are around him. They've made a conscious effort to improve everything around him this offseason.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes, and Keith, I am ready to hear your argument on your bust right here, because this is a guy that I'm very compelled to go in on this offseason, because I feel like he's heading into a very large target share. But tell us why we shouldn't be drafting Diontae Johnson.
First of all, I want to say I completely agree with you with the Bryce Young thing. We went through this with Trevor Lawrence just a few years ago, where horrible situation, horrible offensive line, no weapons. He had a terrible first season. Again, we're talking about fantasy perspective. Huge bounce back year 2. I think you're going to see a very similar thing from Bryce this year. But I mean, Johnson, for me, looking at his ADP, it's not as much of a bust as the case I was going to make, because so many people are so high on him. And that's kind of why I wanted to bring him up here. He's 38th half point PPR ADP, 39th standard, 37th PPR. The deal is he's only finished 38th or better at the wide receiver position twice in 5 seasons. He's had 3 seasons with 144 plus targets. In those seasons, wide receiver 22, wide receiver 39, wide receiver 8. So if you take away the one season, which granted, 2021, he had a great season. It's the only season of over 1,000 yards receiving. I think it was his career high in touchdown receptions, career high in fantasy points. But in the rest of them, he always gets peppered with targets, and he's just somebody that doesn't do a lot. Now, if you're getting him around this 38, 39, range, and especially if it's a PPR league, by all means. But these people expecting to see these, like this monster Diontae Johnson season, I really feel like the outlier was 2021, and he's shown in the other years that he can catch a lot of passes, but he's not going to put up a ton of points. That's just not who he is. And I actually do look at those other guys because, we laughed about Thielen. What happened last year was defenses just started zoning in on him because he was the only Panthers guy doing anything. I'm very high on Xavier Legette in this Panthers offense because he does a lot of the same things Diontae Johnson does, where you get rid of the ball quickly. He's mucho more superior after the catch. Like I've kind of compared him to Debo. It's unfair to do that because Debo is such a freak and just such a monster after the catch. But that's kind of who Xavier Legette is. Is he somebody you get the ball out of the quarterback's hands quickly and let him do his thing? And I'm with you that I like the OC. I feel like there's actually more value in somebody Legette. I'm not dead yet on Jonathan Mingo, which I know a lot of people are. That's fine. I still think he's got some talent. And again, if it's Johnson, where he's going with his ADP, it was not as low as I thought it was, just because I hear so many big people talking about breakout year from Diontae, monster year incoming. And it's like the data shows that's not the case. When you have 144 plus targets in 3 seasons, and only one of them did you crack the top 20 at wide receiver, I don't care if he does get 150 targets. He's not going to have this monster year. That's just not who he is.
Tell you what, that's a pretty good argument for someone who is sitting here and it's like target share is going to be there. We love volume in fantasy. Pointing out the fact that, well, frankly, there might be a better version of him behind him, on top of the fact that, well, even at his best, he has been pretty good at best. I mean, it's an interesting case nonetheless. I think Chris disagrees with you. I think he says you're out on Diontae Johnson because he plays for the Panthers. But you know what? We're going to go ahead and take your argument. We're going to appreciate it. And then we're going to move into our maybe guy, which Nate has, is a guy that heading into his rookie season, he was a lot of people's running back 1. in rookie drafts and dynasty leagues.
Mhm.
And he's probably going to miss part of the season. But you know what? Go ahead and sell us on Jonathan Brooks and why he could possibly be a big winner for people this coming season.
Yeah, he's a maybe because it goes into how you want to build your running back room. And I'm a big proponent of this specific strategy when it comes to building a running back room. Is that if I have my RB anchor, and that's not a style of draft, it's just if I have one of the top 6, 7, 8 running backs, if I decide to go running back within the first 2 rounds, then at that point, I'm going to look at one of 2 different pivots. Is that I wait until very late, or I stack and just, double tap and get real strong. What I would like to do is take one of the stronger running backs and then wait till the end. And when I say wait till the end, I don't mean wait till the end, because Jonathan Brooks is the RB 33. So I truly don't mean the end. But what I mean by that is if I can take Jonathan Brooks and then wait another round or 2 and take a person, for instance, like Jerome Ford, that to me is a really good building block of a first half, second half, make the best use of your running back room. You have your anchor, and then you have a person like Jerome Ford who's going to carry you for the first 6-7 weeks until Chubb does, maybe, if comes back. And at that point, that's when Jonathan Brooks, person who we saw, it took a while for him to break out because he was behind the person who maybe you have as your number 1 running back in Bijan. And he showed flashes at Texas that he's more than capable. We saw that they invest a 2nd round pick. They move up to draft him. Dave Canales, says he won't play his snap in this preseason, but if he's somewhere around week 3, week 4, that'd be great. I think that if I can have him at, quote unquote, full health behind an offensive line that you just talked about, Rhett, that offensive line got much better. Damian Lewis at left guard is, a spectacular left guard to have, especially next to Kwanu. And then you throw in Austin Corbett and Robert Hunt, and you have that interior offensive line that a person like Jonathan Brooks can exploit. And this is my personal take. I don't see this being a pass-heavy offense. I think this is going to be an offense that, despite the fact their defense is probably going to take a step back, they're going to want to try to identify as a run team first and hope that they can nickel and dime on those 3rd and shorts with the Deontay Johnsons, with the Xavier Legettes, and try to move the chains that way. And it wouldn't shock me at all if we see 175 carries out of Jonathan Brooks as the, over the second half of that season. I think that is probably a little high, but if you can get Jonathan Brooks, even if it's 125 carries over the final 7 weeks of the season, I think that you've gotten enough support out of your running backs that you build that tandem around. Let's go around. Let's talk about some guys that this is a draft strategy real quick. Let's say first half running backs. What if you have a person like Zeke? What if you have a person like maybe a Zamir White or a Jerome Ford? Those are the guys that I think are 5-week running backs that after the 5th week, true talent's going to play in and they're going to have no role anymore or a very limited role. Keep smiling because maybe I either struck a nerve or
Struck
he
a little
agrees
nerve
with me.
with Zamir White, but that's okay.
And that's okay. And I respect that because we had this conversation on when you were on your show, and it was, if can't break tackles, I just not the biggest fan, but I don't think he's a bad value regardless. And if Zamir White hits and he does play the whole season and he is the lead back behind that offense, you then have additional pieces. So that's my maybe, Rhett. Draft strategy involved, not to get too far and long-winded, but I think it makes a very good long, final stretch, that Sha'Carri Richardson final leg of that relay that you need. Jonathan Brooks has that breakaway speed that could really take you to a championship.
One of my favorite best ball guys that I've been drafting over and over and over again. To your point that it's like, I don't care if he does nothing for the first 8 weeks. I'm looking at down the stretch in the playoffs in best ball because Carolina has proved that they will, run the ball. They did it, last year down the stretch when they were much more competitive. No surprise. Bryce looked better once they were able to establish that run. I completely agree with you that they're going to come out trying to run it. The only reason I think they're going to end up throwing a lot was I just don't know when you get rid of Burns, et cetera, how good the defense is going to be, and you're going to be down and then forced to throw.
And that's what scares me too, is they're forced to that. And I don't know if, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see Chuba or Miles Sanders as being an impediment to his production in both the passing game and run game. So, that could work in his favor, and especially in the passing game prowess. So even more so. Look at us building each other up. Support. Alley-oops galore.
Perfect way to end this show. Perfect way to cap off the NFC South, where we talked about with the Tampa Bay Bucks, our must being Chris Godwin, our bust being Rachaad White, our maybe being K-Dot, and then moving into the New Orleans Saints with our must being Alvin Kamara, our bust being Rashid Shaheed, and our maybe being Chris Olave. Then Keith Fleming's Atlanta Falcons, with Drake London being our must, Tyler Algier being our so-so bust, and Kyle Pitts being our so-so maybe, and then wrapping up with the Carolina Panthers, where we gave you Bryce Young as our must, Deontay Johnson as our bust, and Jonathan Brooks as our maybe. So, fellas, great show as always. And before we get out of here, I want to open up the floor for both of you. Mr. Keith Fleming, tell us what you have going on inside of fantasy football, outside of fantasy football. The frame is yours.
Again, just want to thank you guys for having me on. Just huge fan of your work. I hate that Drew was not on here because always love hear his thoughts as well. But I can't say enough nice things about your guys' show. I actually legit check it out. It's not one of those, there's a lot of shows, people say, oh, I listen to it. No, I literally listen to your guys' show most weeks. So keep up the great work. Very excited for DFS to be here week 1. Me and Joe Batts already have an hour and 20-minute podcast that you can find on the YouTube channel for Fantasy and Frames, with us nerding out, talking about all the different players and prices, and then me, him, and Kevin, because Kevin Tompkins is joining us this season. We're very, very, very excited about that. We're going to start breaking into value plays, because we're really going to lean in on the Fantasy and Frame show into MME, that is multi-entry events, where we're going to get weird. We're going to get wild. We're going to talk about guys that are low owned and try to build some monster lineups. That will start Friday. Very excited to have Kevin here. And then obviously you can catch me on the draft show each week, trying to derail Stacy and the rest of them from actually doing drafts by talking about whatever the hell I'm talking about. But I'm so proud of what Fantasy and Frames has done in the last year. Over 1,000 YouTube subscribers. If you're listening to this, hit that subscribe button. And the wealth of talent I really do feel right now on this channel is absurd. And I'm very proud to be here and appreciate you guys giving us our DFS niche corner. And anytime you guys need me on this show, I love to chop it up with you guys. So thank you so much.
There's a reason you're the guest appearances leader of all time. Thank you for the kind words. I know Jorge appreciates them. I know we appreciate you tuning in every week. We appreciate everybody tuning in every week. And Nate, if you're still with us, do you have something you want to plug right now? There you are, bud.
I do. I'll plug Kleenex for the sneeze that I just had that will stop it up. Kleenex, if you're listening. That sneeze was brought to you in part by Fantasy and Frames, where we clean up all the messes that you made at draft day. It's Kleenex, brought to you by Fantasy and Frames. No, Keith, you always know I have a special place for you as far as you and I's relationship when it comes to fantasy football, because I admire everything that you do, and the amount of work that you put into it is fantastic. And I would love to come on the DFS show. I'm not a DFS guy necessarily, but I'd love to dig into it, and I could use all the extra money I have to pay again, like I said, for that DoubleTree bill. So I'm looking for all your hits. You and Joe the Brain are fantastic. I mean, for anybody that's listening for the first time, I can tell you this. Last year, every single week, it felt like I got the little message that was mostly a jab. It wasn't a jab at me, but I felt deep and personal that, hey, guess what? We hit 6 of our top 8 value picks. We hit 5 of our top 9 big dollar picks. If you had just put in 15 lineups with using the combinations, even if they were small dollars, you don't have to put thousands of dollars in, you would have been a winner. And each week I didn't. And each week I didn't, because I continue to lose. But Obviously, anytime you ever need somebody, I'm more than happy to support.
Would love
Love
to have
having
you.
you on
Sure.
here. When you said that the wealth of knowledge is incredible, it is. Jorge and everybody here has put in the amount of effort and sweat and tears and camaraderie, etc. At the expo, it was a Fantasy and Frames show. I heard more than a humbling amount of people come up and just constantly rave about every one of you guys and just say such good content that you put out and such, tangible, appreciable, and humble approach towards this game, because we're on the boat together. We all know it can sink anytime, but at the same time, it doesn't when we're all, chucking the water together. And it's a testament to everybody's feeling of worth, etc. But my gosh, when we have 5-6 different people included in the different Kings Classics, Queens Classics drafts, on the different panels that everybody was part of. So if you're listening and you haven't subscribed yet to any of the channels, I 100% would recommend doing so. And I would love to continue this path that we've set.
Yeah, and what a path it is. But guys, before we get out of here, one of our viewers tonight, Matt C, has a question for us before we get out. He is working on a 12-team PPR draft. His first 7 picks: Bijan, Sam Laporta, Nico Collins, Brandon Ayuk, George Pickens, Najee Harris, DeAndre Swift. Let's go around the frames. Let's get you guys' initial thoughts on it. Keith and then Nate.
I like it. My only concern is Laporta. I've been banging this drum all year. It's not that I don't like Laporta the player. He had so many touchdowns last year. I think there's going to be a little bit of regression. And will he get the targets and receptions he did last year? When I think Jameson Williams is going to make a step forward this year. We saw how much Jamar Gibbs, obviously, if everything's okay with him, how much he was involved down the stretch last year. We know St. Brown is a target monster. I do worry about where he's going among tight ends and his ceiling. And that's kind of my concern. But other than that, love the Bijan play. I'm all in on Nico. I think IU, whether he's San Francisco, Pittsburgh, whatever, he's going to be fine. I think he's going to actually stay in San Francisco. And I think Najee Harris is a sneaky pick. I really like that Pittsburgh backfield. Arthur Smith, I'll say a lot of bad things about him, but I can't say he can run the freaking ball. He's done it everywhere he's gone. So I like both of those guys. I like the picks you made so far for sure.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. I thought the exact same. The first thing that stood out was me personally. I'm not a second round Laporta person. I understand the pick. It's not a bad pick per se. It's just that I could very easily swap out 3 or 4 different players going around the same spot Laporta is and insert, even though he was a bust in Kyle Pitts or Kincaid
Evan Ingram
or Evan Ingram.
4th in targets last year. Give us a 7th tight end. It's crazy.
And I feel just as good. And I like the fact that it wasn't there was, the quarterback was waiting a little bit. I mean, the draft process in terms of how it's played out. Listen, you can never go wrong when you have Bijan, Nico, and I'm a big fan of George Pickens. So I think that your receiving core is fantastic. And hopefully that, I hope everything plays out. But here's the best part. If you listen every single week and you come on Sunday mornings and Tuesday, was it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I think are the shows. I'm not 100% certain, but somewhere around those days, any day that ends in Y, we'll help you with that team. Anything you ever need, at Nate Markham, you hit me up. I'll answer any question you ever have.
Yes, indeed. Going back to the comments you had, Chris Battistel said, well said, of course. Matt's thanking us. Bossman is telling us good evening. Bossman, we see you. We got to get out of here, but we can be followed. Keith at Keith Fleming on Twitter. Nate at Nate Markham on Twitter. I can be followed at Manual Sports on Twitter. We'll be back with you guys tomorrow night. Drew will be back in the saddle with us as well as we discuss the NFC East, where the boss man, Jorge Edwards, will be with us. Once again, for Keith Fleming, for Nate Markham, for Drew Scott, who could not be with us tonight, I'm Rhett Manuel. Toodles.